Welcome back to Brass Tacks. Pakistan is literally in the dark. The country is facing one of its worst electricity outages in months. Karachi is experiencing outages going up to 15 hours, while Lahore is without power for nearly 12 hours. This has resulted in the government taking drastic measures, like announcing that markets across the country will be shut down at 8:30 p.m., wedding functions will be banned after 10 p.m., and a 5-day work week for public offices and educational institutions. The outage is the second major grid failure in the last 3 months, and it adds to the blackouts that Pakistan's nearly 220 million people have been suffering on an almost daily basis. According to the Pakistan government, the power generation systems were temporarily shut down at night as an economic measure, and when they turned it back on in the morning, there were frequency variations and voltage fluctuations. But the crisis actually boils down to the state of the economy. The country is grappling with rising fuel prices, which were hiked steeply just a few weeks ago in order to secure IMF funding. The strengthening of the US dollar, that has exacerbated the ongoing crisis. The Pakistani rupee has plunged nearly 30% to the US dollar in 2022. And add to that a global energy crunch, which has been fueled by Russia's invasion of Ukraine and also the post-pandemic demand surge. All of this has led to Pakistan's energy import costs almost doubling in the last few months. The country right now is producing 22,000 megawatts of power. It requires 26,000 megawatts of power. It's not just an electricity crisis. Pakistan is also suffering from an acute wheat shortage, which has left people in dire straits. Viral videos have emerged of people squabbling over subsidized bags of flour that are already in short supply. Another video showing people chasing trucks carrying wheat flour on their bikes, begging for a bag to be given. While the war in Ukraine has disrupted supplies, the other big cause of the wheat shortage is the deadly floods that Pakistan experienced last year. Wheat prices have largely increased in Sindh and Balochistan, which lost significant reserves because of the floods. And Pakistan's economy has been going from bad to worse because of these following factors. Number one, its forex reserves, the foreign exchange reserves, have fallen to a record low of just $4.5 billion. That's a 9-year low. It basically has only money for 3 weeks of imports. There is also record high inflation. Remember, inflation in the month of December touched 24.5%. So prices of essentials are increasing by a quarter every month. According to the World Bank, Pakistan's economic growth is expected to reach just 2% in the fiscal year 22-23. For the July-September quarter of 2022, Pakistan's fiscal deficit widened by 43%. And add to all of this the rising external debt as well, because Pakistan has about $33 billion of debt that has to be paid back by the end of the current fiscal year. Despite this financial crisis, Pakistan continues to court large Chinese loans. According to IMF data, 30% of Pakistan's total foreign debt is owed to China. That is roughly $30 billion. That is 3 times more than its IMF debt, and it's greater than its borrowings from the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank put together. The total planned investment under the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, the CPEC, is pegged at $62 billion between 2015 and 2030. Of these, projects valued at $27.5 billion have been realized up until now. But taking a loan of nearly $10 billion from China for the mainline railway project could create additional risks for Pakistan's economy. Now, Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif is traveling around the world literally with a begging bowl. He co-hosted a key conference in Geneva where the international community pledged to provide nearly $10 billion to Pakistan. Sharif's government has also requested the IMF to conclude a long-awaited agreement to revive a bailout program. And most recently, Sharif had visited the UAE, which agreed to extending the existing loan of $2 billion and provide an additional loan of $1 billion. Now, these chain of events are undoubtedly going to take a toll on Pakistan's fragile political state of affairs as well. Remember, a general election has to be held later this year. Now, Imran Khan, the PTI chief, the former prime minister, he has directly blamed the Sharif government for the electricity shortage and the massive energy crisis. He's also been piling on the pressure by dissolving some of the provincial assemblies where his party, the PTI, was in power. Again, putting pressure on the army and the government to call for early elections. He's hoping that both the army and the government's hand is forced by doing this and that they have to call for early elections. Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, joining us. Hamid Khan is a senior Pakistan journalist. And Uzair Sattar is a research assistant at the Stimson Center in Washington, D.C. Ashok Sajjanhar, first things first, no one wants to see a neighboring country go through this kind of an economic crisis. But the fact is that this is more mismanagement as to why Pakistan has got to where it has today, and less to do with, the country not having the resources to deal with in the first place.
You're absolutely right, Zaka. And I think it's mismanagement at different levels. It's not only economic mismanagement, but it's also political mismanagement. The manner in which Pakistan has handled relations in the political field. You've just spoken about the tussle between Imran Khan and Shehbaz Sharif, how Imran Khan had to be dislodged from his position after a no-confidence motion, and he left screaming and crying. And this is not how democracies should work, how countries should work. So I think there are deep fissures as far as the political system is concerned, and of course the economic policies that have been followed. Pakistan has put itself under a debt trap to China. You mentioned about the $62 billion CPEC. In addition to that, I think their fiscal policies have been highly inadequate. I think there have been so many reports that have come that, what we in India now call, the whole practice of freebies or revdi culture. Mm-hmm. There are so many freebies that are given to the feudal landlords, to the corporate sector, to the army, that, I was reading a figure, it's more than $17 billion of such freebies that are afforded in terms of subsidies, in terms of concessions that are given.
Okay.
There is no prudent fiscal policy that is adopted. So I think if Pakistan has to get out of this morass that it has itself landed itself, it has to make very serious changes in a large number of its policies that it
So,
pursues.
Hamid Khan, I want to talk a little bit about this China factor. About $30 billion is owed just to China alone, whether it's CPEC projects or other projects. The fact is, and we've seen this in other countries, we've seen this in Sri Lanka, we've seen this in countries in Southeast Asia, that Chinese debt is unsustainable. You can build these massive infrastructure projects, but at the end of the day, if that's not going to contribute to the overall economy, or if that's not going to generate enough employment, and there is massive debt that is underfinancing it, then the host countries are not in a position to pay back that debt, as we saw in Sri Lanka 6 months ago.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would say, in intro, you have done, a very truth picture of the economical situation in Pakistan. But you rightly said, and I would say that if you look at the situation in political situation as well, it is badly affecting the whole situation, because Pakistan's GDP growth was 5.97 in 2021, and it was expected to be the same in next year. But all that, Imran Khan's no confidence vote and new government, and they couldn't. And now when it comes to the new government and the current situation, I would definitely agree with the gentleman from the United States that there is a big incompetency, bad governance, and there is no doubt that, sometimes they not understand the sensitivity or the criticality of the situation. But at the moment, there is 2-3 things which we need to understand. That the shortfall of the electricity is only 4,000 megawatts. Mm-hmm. It's not that high that I would say that it will collapse everything. Yes, the country is suffering with the load shedding, and they need to have a better management. But it is not about. It is mainly about the management and competency, rather than the crisis of the availability of the electricity. On the other hand,
the data that I shared, I think the daily requirement is 26,000 megawatts, and what Pakistan is producing is about 22,000 megawatts. But the issue is, the response has been, instead of trying to cut down T&D losses, instead of trying to cut down these illegal wires that have been pulled out by people, instead of trying to rationalize electricity subsidies, You say shut down markets by 8:30, shut down weddings
No, no,
post
no,
10 p.m.
no,
That's like
I,
Band-Aid. That's like Band-Aid. You're not really solving the problem.
I agree with you. It is not solving the problem, and this is what I call the bad management. This is what I call the incompetency of the government,
Okay.
because they need to take the proper actions.
Okay, let me ask Uzair Sattar. Add to all of these economic woes, you have the political crisis. I mean, there is literally no love lost between Imran Khan and the Sharifs, and certainly between Imran Khan and the army, given what happened in the final few months of his prime ministership. He is forcing the hand of the army and the incumbent government to call for early elections. Given this economic dire straits that Pakistan is in, can it even afford to host an election? And even if it does, it's not like Mr. Imran Khan is an economist par excellence. I mean, in his years as prime minister, it's not like Pakistan was running on horses when it comes to its economic situation. In fact, this economic situation has gotten progressively bad over the last many years. Even in Imran Khan's prime ministership, we did see things were quite bad. The negotiations with the IMF were going on. It's not like the whole world was coming to Pakistan's rescue. So it's not like he has some economic magic wand that can suddenly transform the situation.
No, he doesn't. And I think you rightly pointed out in your introduction that this is one of many blackouts, electricity blackouts that Pakistan has experienced. There was one in January 2021 at this scale as well under the Imran Khan government.
Yeah.
But these blackouts are a symptom and not a cause of sort of Pakistan's economic problems. The causes of the problems are not going to go away with general elections either.
Yeah.
As much as that is sort of a political ambition of the PTI at the moment, its fruit will only be realized if an election leads to political and economic reforms that create a course correction in Pakistan that the country hasn't seen in the last 70 years. And so elections are sort of a means to an end, and those ends are reforms. But on their own, it can lead to a continuation of sort of the business as usual sort of.
But why is no political party interested in those economic reforms, Mr. Sattar? The PTI was ruling. It's not like they took any measures for economic reforms. Now you have the PDM that is ruling. Again, major parties, the PPP is there, the PMLN is there. Again, it doesn't seem like they are particularly interested in economic reforms. There isn't even pressure from the army, which many say, is the actual sort of power behind the throne, as it were, in Pakistan. But even they are not putting pressure on the political establishment for economic reforms. Why is that?
Well, I think reforms are supposed to be cutting across the board, be it civil, military, within the bureaucracy. I think the question that needs to be asked is who is benefiting from the current crisis.
Yep.
Just take the blackout that you mentioned as an example. The elite of the country had generators, had UPS to sort of continue their own sort of private power generation, whereas sort of millions of people who are not a part of the elite didn't. Yeah. And so there's an inherent reluctance from people that benefit from the status quo to engage in reforms. And I think that's especially heightened in an election year. This is currently an election year. And so taking reforms that are painful for the economy, for the elite themselves, are just that much harder to do. But the hope is that with a mandate, with a new electorate that sort of comes in, there will be a greater ability to sort of move towards those demands. And I think what helps as well is that it's a dual-edged sword, whereas historically Pakistan has relied on sort of external assistance to keep their economy afloat. You said begging bowl. I think I just referred to it as basic economics, where you don't have enough dollars that are inside your country compared to the dollars that are leaving.
I got to wrap up. I'm completely out of time. I think this is again food for thought for many people in Pakistan and beyond. For the last 20 years, there was the war on terror. And for years, for the last 2 decades, for 20 years, American dollars were coming into Pakistan in the form of military aid, non-military aid. That tap has been turned off now. And that tap has gone dry. And I think it's no coincidence that suddenly, when that tap has gone dry, Pakistan is feeling the pressure of the economic reforms that it should have done 1 too many years ago. But we'll leave it at that. We'll see how the story plays out. Like I said, No one wants to see a neighbor do badly, but in this case, it's more mismanagement than a lack of resources. That's a wrap. Mari Shakil joining you with News Epicenter.